SwayamPrabha. Digital India. Educated India.
So far we have discussed about Spanish landscape styles and the Mughal landscape styles. Very interestingly, you will find that the Oriental landscape styles which got evolved so many years back, Chinese landscape style, let us discuss about this particular landscape which got evolved in China. Of course, the location is China. The period is 551 to 479 BC. This figure like 551 or 479 is not very sacrosanct, but historically or through research or through other references what we get is this year. But however, that means let us take it as a say 550 BC. It dates back to that so many years. Very interestingly, you will find later that something which got evolved so many years back gradually also been emulated by many other landscape styles which might have earned more popularity. The climate, what is climate like? Climate is varying from region to region, and in northeast the summers are hot and dry and the winters are freezing cold. That means it is quite varied in terms of its climate. And north and central regions have frequent bouts of rain coupled with hot summers and cold winters. Now this makes it very varied. In such kind of cases, what happened is that Chinese people, when they evolved this landscape, they evolved from the climate and also from the geography. In general, the climate is warm, humid. Now comes the terrain. It's varied landscape with mountains and valleys. Soil is rich alluvial, which is very conducive for any kind of vegetative growth. So naturally, Chinese landscape has a good amount of vegetation and water. Some regions are highly flood prone. More than half the coastline is rocky and most of the remainder is sandy. Now let us see. The whole Chinese landscape is so varied, varying from north to south to east to west, and we have the rocky edge, coastal edge, but there are lots of areas which are sandy, and there are some areas which are very much flood prone. It has rich soil, rich alluvial soil. The climate is warm, humid. Now all these makes it almost natural that even if nothing is done, the vegetative growth is quite rampant, it can grow. Now comes the socio-political history. Especially the Chinese system socio-politically was highly war infested. There were civil wars, there were monarchies, and people, they almost took refuge to the kind of refuge from all these wars. People wanted peace, but however, the lifestyle was very, very much war infested. And the expression of the Chinese landscape, contrary to the Spanish and the Mughal that I have discussed earlier, is natural and asymmetrical. What we saw in Mughal, it is very formal. Of course, the natural elements are essential component of landscape, so naturally, but the whole setting, whole expression was natural. That means if you enter a Chinese garden, you feel that you have entered into a natural setting. Now, architecture, because landscape is never devoid of architectural elements. It's pagoda style, symmetric individual spaces with various axial layouts, pavilions. So pavilion became one of the very important feature in the landscape, which also has been followed in Japan. So when we will make a comparison between all four, you will find that there will be there is some bit of variations as well as commonalities. What is the landscape character at that time? Natural setting, organic, derived directly from the nature. In fact, our study or our understanding of the historical evidences of the landscape styles clearly indicates that Chinese landscape was originally the most natural in nature. Rest of the things were made dominantly. That means if we go by the categories of landscape, category 1, 2, 3, in category 1, which is raw nature, Chinese landscape almost befits that. When you go into general definitions of category 2, any civilizations or any developments resulting to landscape is another kind. So, Chinese landscape fits well with the first category. The elements are lakes, ponds, low height vegetation, rocks, high peripheral vegetation. If you see, when we discuss Japanese garden, you will find the similarity in this. Here, the low height vegetations are in the foreground and slightly higher vegetations at the background. If you go to landscape character, Chinese landscape is highly protective. If you remember that I said that socio-political history was highly war infested. If it is so, in such case what happens is the defense mechanism or the security mechanism was very important. Same defense mechanism we have seen in the Mughal gardens also. The gardens are surrounded by high walls. The vegetation was first a camouflage of the wall, at the same time filtering for Mughal. Here also it is surrounded by the walls, and also it has one or more ponds within it. Apparently, it is very natural and very organic, but it is well organized, it is well composed. Essentially, the whole pattern follows the Chinese original scroll pattern. The concealment and surprise is an essential element in this particular landscape. Means you enter a Chinese garden, you find there is always an element of surprise. You go from one place to another, you move from one to another, you will find there is always a element of surprise, and it is varied, it is never monotonous. And borrowing scenery, that means emulating nature, taking what is available in the nature or apparently in the nature, they have just borrowed it. And this borrowing nature is in different times and in different seasons. And there would be a two-story tower. Why? Let us not think about it now. Essentially, in the landscape, we have to have one two-story structure, a tower. Appears organic, intrinsically natural. This gives us an idea, means contrary to Mughal and Spanish, here more nature. If you take a certain area of landscape, then you will find the major areas are nature. Architecturally, within that landscape, there are certain elements which are architectural elements. If suppose anyone wants to emulate Chinese garden, then these are essential elements which will come in. One is a ceremony hall, this one, this kind of picture, where we have a ceremony hall, ceremony will be conducted over there. Now, this building is basically for ceremonies that sits in the landscape. So, it has an inner courtyard, and then there is a principal pavilion. This pavilion, a veranda around a building which makes a pavilion. If you compare, similar thing is there in our Mughal garden also, which is Baradari. Similar. This pavilion is where people are going to sit there, enjoy nature, have cool breeze, cool water cooling the air temperature. That is the kind of element. And then we have pavilion of flowers. Now, this building is generally near the residence. In this pavilion means you be here, and then you have mostly flower plants which are organized in this. So, this is the kind of elements which makes it unique for Chinese. Other items, the pavilion facing the four directions, in four cardinal directions. Now, this will have a pagoda kind of style of roof, and it has a folding walls. So, basically, if you see this kind of buildings sitting in some place of the garden, it makes it very, very interesting as a composite element or integrated elements of the landscape. Then we have the lotus pavilion. You have the pavilion and you have the lotus grown all around in these areas. Now, what happens is these spaces become very, very significant in the whole area. And then pavilion of mandarin ducks. Now, you see, if you go back to these pictures yourself and try to re-look into this, you will find the landscape is overall nature within which we have some structures. These are all different pavilions which becomes an integral part of it, but never dominates the landscape. So, landscape remains very, very natural, and these are the items which are an integral part of the whole landscape. So, if we try to see with respect to these elements again, towers, bridges, kiosks, the galleries, and the courtyards. These elements, these are one set of elements. Now, re-look into this picture once again. This bridge is essentially connecting one landmass to another landmass where the water is interjecting or water is intercepting. So, the bridge is very much designed. Now, there are multiple ways of bridge designing in the Chinese landscape, as I have seen. That one is, this is very regular, the bridge design, which is a very standard construction of wood, but they have also made it with bamboos. The bamboos are bent in the arc fashion, and then over that they have laid the soil, and then they have paved it with different paving materials like woods and all, or sometimes even the grass, and that becomes a bridge. So, essentially bridge also became one of the important element. Then again, summarize it. We have the pavilions, various kind of pavilions. We have a tower, we have bridges, we have small kiosks, we have courtyards. Other elements, we have temples, then halls, then pavilions, and then windows and doors for viewing it. Altogether makes it a composite Chinese landscape style. Then I will link it all together. Other elements, flowers and trees, then artificial mountains, then rock gardens, and then ponds or lakes. You will see that other than those pavilions or the towers, most of the elements are natural. The bridge is artificial, but given a look of a naturality in most of the cases. So, it used to spread over a large area in the Chinese landscapes, contrary to Japanese one. When I will come to Japanese landscape, I will discuss this, but yet Chinese landscape, it covers a large area. There are various water bodies of different size and scale. There is no chance or no sign of formality at all. It is all spread around as if nature has endowed this to this particular site, and then all items are placed one after another. Let us take an example of this humble administrator's garden in Suzhou. Look at this picture. Now, it has this part where it is a western section, then we have the Mandarin Duck Hall, then we have the central section, and then we have the Rainbow Bridge here, then you have the Fragrance Isles, the Hall of Distinct Fragrance, and then Secluded Pavilion and the Orange Pavilion. If you recall all these pavilions, then bridge, then Mandarin Duck ponds, such things are common elements. There are some representative pictures which I am presenting now with respect to, this is for western section, this is for Mandarin Duck Halls, and this is for the Orange Pavilion, and this one is for Secluded Pavilion, this one is for Hall of Distinct Fragrance, and this is the Fragrance Isles. Then we have the Rainbow Bridge, and then we have a central section. That makes the entire area a good landscape example of Chinese. Look at the map here, the pictorial, in which you will find there is no formality anywhere. everything is so irregular, as if it is just there as it was supposed to be naturally. Another example, the summer palace of the Beijing, in which you will find the front hills, then we have the back hills, then we have the Nanu Islands, and then we have the eastern dam, then we have the western dam. Now, if you look back to this particular picture once again, you will find this is natural, very much natural. Some more pictures which I am presenting for the summer palace, Beijing, in which you will see one very important element for this summer palace is the boat house. This boat house is unique to Chinese landscapes. This boat house has not been found in any other landscape styles. Especially the reason is that, of course, there are water bodies, large water bodies in many of the landscape styles, whether it is Oriental or whether it is Central or whether it is European. But the Chinese landscape was grand in scale, and in this grand scales we have this boat house as one. Look at this particular picture. I am just pointing out to one picture here. This is that position of that boat house, which you can see as a picture on the right. So, essentially, and there is a large area over which we have the bridge. So, what you can infer from this is Chinese landscapes used to span over a large area. Point to be noted, a large area, large water bodies of irregular sizes, multiple lakes, ponds and others, and not necessarily islands, but it is a landmass connected, and then there were different elements, pavilions, towers and such other elements. Now, very interestingly, I would like to discuss about the Japanese style, but always drawing reference to the Chinese style. That is why I have placed the Japanese style a little after. If you see with respect to time frame by the baseline information, the period is 500 to 1870 AD. Recall the Chinese landscape, it was 500 BC, means the Chinese landscape, the time span difference, the Chinese landscape and the Japanese landscape is about 1000 years. Very interestingly, in the historic styles, Chinese landscape almost lost its popularity, rather it was never popular, and such natural landscape became popular when Japanese emulated it. In my analysis of these landscapes, I have found that the Japanese landscape is, I won't say copy, but it is a very, very honest emulation of Chinese landscape styles, because the geography is also similar, the location is in the similar, and the climate is also similar. But Japanese became very, very strong in creating such kind of landscapes. So, the climate is humid, 15 degrees Celsius is average temperature, and average rainfall is 15 mm per hour, and 251 days sunshine, which makes any vegetative landscape a rich potential. The terrain is surrounded by sea, a small island continent, Japan, surrounded by sea, and there are small rocks, hills, even some hills or rocks within the water. Majority of the areas are flattish and they have good vegetation. A small scale but varied landscape with mountains and valleys. Comparing with Chinese, similar. But since China is a larger geographic area, in such cases what happens is Chinese landscape was spread over, and that variation was quite distinct. But in Japanese landscape, since it is a small area within which it has been developed, it is not distinctively different. But when I will come to socio-political thing, then we will understand how it has been developed. There is plenty of rivers, broad and short, different sizes, with rock bed with no water at times. This made the Japanese landscape a unique kind. Rich soil, no permanent grass. Now, recall the Chinese landscape. In some areas it is highly rocky, in some areas it is sandy, in some areas it is flood prone, in some areas it is vegetative cover. in Japanese landscapes, geographical situation in the terrain, it is soil is rich in both the cases, and in Japanese landscape areas, permanent grass was not really much. Socio-political history wise, similar, war infested. In fact, the Japanese landscape got evolved over a long years, guided by the socio-political history. At one point of time, as Chinese created the landscapes as per the whims or the wish or the pleasure of the rulers. So the patrons were rulers. It was not for common people. Japanese landscape style that got evolved when they were very much depressed with the wars and all, then they wanted to take a retreat from all this kind of socio-political disturbances. Then they took to Zen Buddhism. Originally they had the Shinto religion. In this, when they took to Buddhism, they required a serene atmosphere. So what they did is they withdrawn themselves from the common time, and they focused into, or rather converged into, a small area which is natural, and then created it very, very deliberately. Interestingly, Chinese landscapes were created as it required, but in Japanese landscape they have created deliberately. That makes it different from Chinese landscape, but elements are similar, you will see. So basically, civil wars that did result in the shift towards religious beliefs. What's the expression like? Natural kinesthetic experience. What is kinesthetic experience? In Chinese landscape, you sit in one of the pavilions and enjoy. In Mughal landscape, you sit in Varadari or Chabutara and enjoy. But in Japanese landscape, what happens is you have to really move. You have to be in the dynamic mode. Then only you can really enjoy the landscapes. In Chinese landscape, it was grand. Japanese landscape was never grand. It was a small scale, and small scale resulting from small land masses or land area, it became an unique landscape style which many of the landscapists or designers emulated in future. Architecture, least building elements, pagoda style pavilion is there. That pavilions are mainly for contemplation. Originally, for comparing with Chinese, the pavilions were for grandeur, pavilions were for ceremony, pavilions were for viewing. But here in Japanese landscape style, the pavilions or such structures were for contemplation, where they wanted peace and they wanted to be within. Modular internal spaces blending seamlessly with the outdoor with varying axial layout. Architecturally, if you see, it sometimes it would be very difficult to understand that when the space, which is very regular, guided by the modular dimensions of tatami mat, 3 feet by 3 feet is the tatami mat, which is used by any of the Japanese for sitting with the folded legs, and then tatami mat, which is now 2 modules of 3 feet by 3 feet. If you join, then it becomes 3 by 6. It becomes a mat for sleeping. So there spatially is very modular. So the rooms were also guided by this form of modular. So the original module was a tatami mat, 3 by 3 feet. But it is very interesting to watch that that particular landscape, which became integral part or say attached part to the building, it flowed out. I'll just try to show you one sketch here. Say this is the unit that for residence purposes. Let there be another unit for residence purposes. If you really measure it, probably you will find that this is a multiple of such tatami mats. And then the landscape flows out. And when it flows out, apparently it may appear to be for residential ones that okay, it's very regular, but once you come out, you will be losing the sense of this geometry of the structure, which is highly modular. This is what is very, very interesting in case of Japanese. Now, but there are the actual good landscape projects which we cite as example. They have very little structures. One pagoda, and one tea house maybe, and there may be one or two small residences. But the idea is the modular building elements blending well with the nature. Landscape character, predominantly natural setting, organic, minutely crafted out of natural elements. Minutely crafted out of natural elements means what? Natural element is there, but it is well structured, well crafted, miniaturized, creative replicative forms. I will explain. Elements and materials, if you try to see, lakes, ponds, low height vegetation. The low height vegetation in the foreground, just like Chinese, as we said, rocks, high peripheral vegetation, as in Chinese landscape we have seen, boundaries with vegetation. These are basic elements. Other elements are, okay, the buildings were light. First of all, any building that was there in the Japanese landscapes are light, extrovert and asymmetric. Asymmetric minded, not in small one room space, asymmetric in terms of its arrangement. This makes it a little comparable with the Spanish landscape. In Spanish landscape, each habitable space was very geometric, very formal, but the combination of such spaces were very much asymmetric, very much non-axial. Same is true with Japanese landscape. Mostly timber construction for structures, tatami mat, as I said, as a module. Internal courts are integral part of the architectural spaces, pagoda profile of roof, and shape is evolving in conjunction with the landscape. So, what happened in Japanese landscape style is such structure, architectural structure, became almost an integral part with the landscape. House and landscape, they appear to be interlocked, complementing each other. So, in Japanese landscape style, interestingly, if you walk from the nature or landscape to the structure, as if we are entering into another component of the landscape. And what I had been saying repeatedly is strong influence of Chinese style. This strong influence of Chinese style did not really earn much popularity in Chinese, but if you see that it earned popularity in the Japanese landscape style. In terms of landscape character, if you try to see, it is absolutely asymmetric, except one, that is garden of contemplation. I will show you that also. Otherwise, the entire Japanese landscape is very much asymmetric. You fail to realize that what has been planned. At this point, let me mention one point is, every landscape is designed meticulously. If you look at the Spanish landscape, then you understand, yes, it has been planned very meticulously with dimensions and all, but looks so formally informal. If you look at the Mughal garden, then you know that every part is very well structured, very formal, geometric. In Chinese landscape, because of its grandness, it appeared that it is evolved from the nature. In Japanese landscape, mind it, every square foot or every square meter is planned, deliberate. So, in all these examples that I am saying, all these, in my opinion, is the category 3, where landscapist has deliberately done it. Structure is subdued, but it makes a wonderful picturesque scenery. There is a pavilion of contemplation. Such, if you compare with Chinese, yes, they also have pavilion, but that's not necessarily for contemplation. The difference is, in Chinese landscape, if there is a pavilion, it's for grandeur. People wanted to sit there. Ruler wanted to sit and then enjoy the nature. And in this Japanese landscape, it was for contemplation. That means they were in the nature, sitting in the pavilion, but they became convergent for introspections. Tea house is another very important structure in the landscapes, and there is a famous tea ceremony, that is a ritual that they follow. which is slightly away from the main structure. So if you now look at the Japanese landscape profiles, you will find that there is a pavilion, and if the landscape is of a residential area, say, in such cases also the tea house will be there, but slightly off. And when you go from one place to another, there is a movement made from one place to another, go to tea house at different point of time maybe. Then in such cases the user would move along the paths, and the path is leading through nature, in the meandering nature, and then it reaches that particular tea house. Now in such cases what happens is the tea house becomes an integral part here. There are islands. You remember the lakes and ponds we mentioned in Chinese landscape? Here we have the islands, and those islands are also given some identity. It is Turtle Island, Crane Island. These islands will be spread over very asymmetrically, very organically within those water bodies, and when you look from the pavilion, as if it emerged from the nature. Then there are lakes which will be reflecting the moon and sky. Now if I look at it, analyze it, then we will find one thing. The Japanese, they wanted to create a drama in the whole landscapes. They had reasons to create that landscape, and they wanted that, okay, there should be a water body in front, there will be a pavilion. The pavilion may be for contemplation, but that should be overlooking the water body. There will be water body of different sizes at different distances, and there may be a distant lake, there may be a frontal lake, and there will be in between land masses which will be connected with another by bridges. There will be those water bodies will be reflecting the moon or even the sun at different times of the day, and we have the tea house. Whole experience is that you move from one place to another, keep on experiencing, and then you see the whole landscape. Thick, low height, drooping, green dominated tree at the periphery to provide mystic, endless boundary effect. You know what is the result of this is? Please take note of it. Contrary to the Japanese landscape profiles, so the geographic profiles is not very large. It means the landscapes of Japan are small areas, and the Chinese landscape is over a large area. But the way they planned it and the way they have put the drooping vegetation on the edge, it almost gives you no sense of what is beyond. So it appears that you are sitting in the midst of a nature, and your vision is ending at the vegetation, and from there on sky. So it becomes boundless, it becomes almost endless. This is deliberately done. This is one of the examples of the bridge in which they have put the stones in such a manner and then the vegetation in such a manner that you cross this particular path, but yet you feel that it's in the midst of a nature. Now if we very specifically think about the elements, tea room is one, pavilion is another, the ponds and lakes or koi ponds are there, and then we have the islands. Other elements are water basin. This water basin will be placed close to the tea house, because ritually you have to wash for ablution purposes, you have this. And then we have the garden bridge. This bridge is wherever there is a connectivity between two islands or two land masses are required, they have created this. There have been lots of other experiments with these items, which I will discuss in some other lecture. Then rocks and the replicated river with quartzite sand bed. Let me elaborate a little more on this. You remember I said that in Japanese landscapes, natural landscapes, there are water bodies, sometimes there is no water in it, most often dry. It's not necessary that all the water bodies in the Japanese continent are all very highly water carrying. No, it's dry. What they have done over here is, this became a unique feature, they created a water kind of profiles with the sand, and the sand with the quartzite sand, and at different times of the day, whether it's day or in the night, due to the sunlight or the moonshine, basically what happens is that all those quasars, they sparkle, and once they sparkle, as if you are seeing the lights on the water. So the entire mystic environment that they create makes it an unique feature, and they rake the sand as if it's a ripples that's running. Another element is stone lantern. This stone lantern has been an integral part for a very logistic reasons. It's not for artistic thing, but it became an artistic feature later. Stone lantern has been placed in these areas in such a way that whenever in the evening, if any ritual has to be done and you have to move from one place to another, just to provide light on the pathways, small lanterns are placed. Those lanterns later on became an integral element of the Japanese landscape. And then later on, various creators, artists or landscapists, they started experimenting with different forms of stone lantern. Interestingly, it is not one design. There are multiple such designs of stone lantern. So what happens is this wash basin, the tea room, the stone lantern, the bridges, the pavements, all become a part of, another component of expression with creativity. So different designers, they experimented with different kind of forms, styles, and patterns. Other items: paving, artificial mounds, trees, pathway, and the dry waterbed. Here I have to draw your attention to these points. Artificial mounds have been created to replicate the hills. Dry waterfall is created, which is for replicating waterfalls. Even small vegetations has been cropped, trimmed, and pruned to shapes to replicate rocks. So here everything was miniaturized. The scale was replicated. Not everything was original. The dry waterfall that they have designed, in this there is no waterfall really. There is no falling water. They created as if there used to be a waterfall, and that waterfall has ceased to supply water. Now it is dry. And if you look at this particular scale, it is miniaturized, very small. That made it unique for one reason, that Japanese garden became almost replicable in any size and any scale. People adopted this style even in one of the small courtyards of the house. It can be done because everything that you reduce down to a small scale. So here this replication and miniaturization, that made it unique and which made it stand out against Chinese landscape. Chinese landscape, if you want to create, then you have to have a grand area. In Japanese landscape, no. If you have a small scale area, even within your lobby, entrance lobby of a hotel, or your small backyard or front yard of your house, wherever you want, you can always make a Japanese landscape. Only thing is, you have to decide up to what miniature scale you are going to go for. This has made it very, very unique and copyable. This is one example of Chizen Shui Toin or pond garden. In this, what happened is there's a water body and there are rocks. Let me draw your attention to this particular picture here. Mind it, everything is created. You don't think that everything was there in the nature. No, it has been created to replicate the surrounding sea and its edges. Look at this particular picture. If you see, it appears that the landmass is going, it's raised. They created the landmass going a little upper, and then they created the vegetation to give that particular profile. Then they had the ponds with lily. Then the paradise garden, in which they have created the pathways. The plantations are well manicured, well trimmed, well pruned, vegetation all around. And all the trees are essentially not very big in size, but they are drooping in nature. These are some examples which I am just showing you. The bridge is deliberately done, but most often I will tell you in Japanese garden, this is almost a replica of the Chinese bridge, but most often in Japanese landscape, such long bridges or large bridges or such arcs are not present. But if you look at the entire area and try to compare with the pictures that I have shown in Chinese landscape, you will find Chinese landscape appear to be more natural, and here it appeared to be natural but cosmetic. That means it has been deliberately created. Nature does not give us such kind of very cosmetic or very well manicured landscapes. But however, that is what we have learned and we have got as a boon. Dry rock garden. In this, if you look at these sand, they basically have been raked as if it's a water, the ripples of the water. Similar, a stone lantern at this particular point, the rocks, small vegetation in the foreground, there is slightly larger vegetation at the background. Don't get surprised if suppose beyond this particular line is again non-landscaped area. But as long as you are within a Japanese landscape, you are totally confined and converging towards inward. This particular landscape is our symbolic garden. I will come to this, but however, why this is symbolic? Because they put the stones to represent rock, they put the sand to represent water, they raked the sand to represent ripples in the water, and all around they have the place of contemplation. So this tea garden, tea house, which has become a component of the tea garden, that means in the whole landscape areas where you have the pavilion, you have the water body, lakes, you have the islands, and also you have a tea garden, and there is a tea house in the center. This makes it spatially different components of the Japanese landscapes. There are many such examples, and you will find every time if you look at any picture, you will always feel that they are so natural in nature. But the thing is, everything is designed. If you look at this, they are very much connected with the pavements. So it is well defined in terms of paths. Another example. Then we have the promenade garden. Promenade garden is what? That the garden is designed where you have to move. This brings us to the idea of kinesthesia. So what is kinesthesia? That when you are basically enjoying your whole expression, your body starts responding to your dynamism. Why you use this kinesthesia along with the Japanese garden styles? Essentially what happens is you start exploring the Japanese landscape once you are in dynamic mode. That means you are moving. This gives a very clear indication that if you are in the Japanese garden, don't stand static. You may do that for other landscape, but not in Japanese garden. Of course, in Chinese garden also, even since it is very grand, you can still see a large component of the Chinese garden standing at one particular point or multiple such points. But in Japanese landscape, since they created an element of surprise at every nooks and corners and every bends, and the bends are never formal. So it is in the meandering path. So what happens is when you are in the Japanese garden, to experience it, you have to start from one particular point where there is entry or any other point, and then you have to keep on moving. And once you keep on moving, your body responses based on what you are viewing. And more you are viewing, whether you are liking. If you are liking, then this experience is also stimulating your body responses, and that is why the kinesthesia works. So it's basically the kinesthetic experience that you get when you are in Japanese landscape style. In Mughal, what I have found is stand in one corner, see the whole Mughal garden, done. But in Japanese garden, you have to move around and see. This promenade garden is where you have to move along this, like take a stroll. In fact, that reminds me one particular point. You know, the Japanese garden, when they started evolving, it evolved over different periods. It's not in one shot the Japanese garden style came out. All these independent items, which now are an integral part of the Japanese garden, evolved over time. At one point of time, the Japanese garden got evolved with the concept of stroll garden. That means a garden where you move around and experience. Then when the ceremony included the tea ceremony, then the tea garden got evolved. Then when it came to a situation when contemplation was more required, then in such cases contemplating pavilions were created. So the point is, at different points of time this kind of gardens got evolved. Here in the promenade garden, you are allowed to, or rather you are expected to move around different paths through different pathways, pavings, and then the bridges, small bridges, not necessarily arch. Let me clarify, not necessarily arch. It can be even straight path, straight bridge. Nowadays, what is happening is, when people are trying to emulate the Japanese landscapes and trying to emulate even the bridges, people are experimenting in this manner. They are using a stone block and then another one, linking, say, one particular landmass with another particular landmass where there is water in between. That means essentially this connectivity is given by these paths. So there people are experimenting on different kind of paths, profiles. No longer it is kind of arch which people have borrowed from the Chinese landscape style. No, originally in Chinese landscape style we saw this kind of arches, and you can see in this picture here that it is such emulation of Chinese landscape arch bridges, but people have experimented with many things. Quite often, deliberately, a small narrow channel, if there is a landmass, deliberately the landmass has been separated with a small water channel, and then a bridge is created. So basically the entire thing is being created. So it is almost boundless creation that we do see in the Japanese landscapes. There are mounds which are created which replicates the hilly areas, and then we have the courtyard gardens, in which the whole garden is set within a very limited courtyard. These are essentially the courtyard gardens we have found mostly in the residential areas. In such areas, what happened is they made everything a replicated one. Now, if you compare with the pictures that I have shown just now, they were more natural, and here it is very organized. Mind it, organized, but look for all those elements, you will find everything. An example, you will find the wash basin here. So this becomes a ritual in terms of landscape designs. Look at this, it is a lantern. Look at this, it's a sand bed which is replicating water. Then we have small vegetations. So if I now try to understand that these are the different kind of elements which are to be used in the Japanese landscape, wherever you want to make, even a small container, if you want to develop as a Japanese landscape, these elements have to be given, and the elements can be miniaturized. That's the advantage of us. Here, within the residential courtyard, Japanese landscape is created. Try to create a Mughal garden within this particular domain, you will find that this will lose the scale, because the Mughal gardens are very much grand in scale. But I can say that to a certain extent, Spanish garden you may be emulating in such kind of small areas. But try to emulate Chinese garden in the same scale of this particular area, you will find that it will be lost. So Japanese garden gave us that opportunity where we can create such kind of landscapes. This is another example. So people are experimenting different kinds. So creativity has no limit. And then there is a hermitage garden. Hermitage garden is essentially for religious purposes. Very well crafted, well manicured, well maintained. Another thing, let me point out, in Japanese landscape what happens is when you are moving around, you are not supposed to move around wherever you wish. No, you are guided by the paths. In such kind of landscapes here, you are not supposed to step into this sand. You are not supposed to touch this vegetation. You are supposed to sit here and then enjoy the nature. So the whole thing is very well manicured. That gave us different kind of examples of paving, integral paving with vegetation, which nowadays we are using very effectively for parking areas and such. So this is the kind of thing which got developed over ages in the Japanese landscape style. So here it is integrated with the building, but well manicured here, very well crafted. Let me just show you one example, maybe one or two. Kinkakuji Temple of the Golden Pavilion, Kyoto, is one of the famous one. Okay, I must mention, very interestingly, historic landscape examples you will find in Kyoto. Originally, it was the capital of Japan. Later, the capital got shifted to Tokyo. We sometimes very interestingly say that if you take Kyoto and take Kyo and put under To, then it becomes Tokyo. So, we can correlate the Kyoto was originally capital, and in which there are lots of other examples of Japanese landscape. I will be citing only few. This is one of the famous one, Kinkakuji, which is well frequented by visitors, international as well as national visitors who go there and ultimately enjoy it. Scale with respect to the Golden Pavilion, if you see, it may appear to be very, very large. Actually, it is not. That is the interesting part of Japanese landscape. The scale is not very large. If you be personally there, then you will find, oh my God, it's so small. I thought looking at the picture it's quite large. No, it is that largeness, the feeling of largeness, of vastness, or spread that has been created by these creation things. Another example which let me cite here, this is important, we must not miss it. The Ryuanzi Symbolic Garden of Contemplation. This garden is absolutely different from the standard Japanese garden that we have been citing. Here, essentially the garden is nothing but a symbol, but elements are there, elements like sand and then rocks. They have about 15 rocks or something, but they are very organized in this manner, which becomes a symbolic one. So, this particular garden has been termed as a symbolic garden, around which the monks would sit and chant their rhymes. Everybody is contemplating, focusing towards this particular garden, nobody steps into it. This is a symbolic garden, and quite often people are even trying to emulate this. Looks so well manicured, so well crafted, and so well designed and maintained. Same thing, the quasi sand which is spreaded over, then raked, then made ripples, and around the rocks they made circular ripples as if the water is moving around. Such things that they have created. Another one is the Shaiyoji garden, which is famous as moss garden. This garden has a little different. This difference is there they have allowed the moss to grow. That means it has taken the advantage of the humidity or the humid climate of Japan, in which, let us see the components. We have the gateway, and then we have the main hall, and then we have the pathways which is leading from one place to another. There is pathway connected, all through the pathway is connected, and then we have the golden pond, the entire one, and then we have the entry at this particular point. Here when you move around this particular landscapes, you will find everywhere it appeared to be as if it emerged from the nature. That is the creation. Excellent part of the Japanese garden is that it emerged from the nature, but once you move around, you definitely would have a feel that something has been miniaturized. But if you be in Chinese garden, you will feel you are in the midst of the nature. Nature has endowed this. Enter a Japanese garden style, then you start not only enjoying the nature, but also you start appreciating the creativity of the landscapist or the designer. Let me conclude at this particular point on this aspects of the historic gardens, essentially oriental. What have you learned in this? And then what lies ahead? In this, we have tried to understand that if a landscape has to be evaluated or understood, then it must be understood in terms of its location, in terms of its climate, in terms of its history, socio-political history, in terms of its architecture, integral architecture, in terms of its landscape character, in terms of its elements. All landscapes should be reviewed with respect to such items. So, when you look back to my earlier part of this lecture, you will find that all these aspects are well discussed. Another thing we have learned is that the landscapes where all these landscapes that we will be citing, we have cited and also will be citing in future, some of them, they are all the creation or the result of the wishes or sponsorship or the whims of the rulers, not for common. So, all historic landscapes are not for common. At this moment, all historic landscapes that we have existing in the world, they are for common. Common people are visiting this, but in their time it was not for common people. We are lucky that we can get to see all these. Some are classical and some are very romantic. Very classicals are Mughals, Spanish. Very romantic are Chinese, Japanese. But there are some of the Mughal gardens like Shalimar Bagh or Nishad Bagh, they are also romantic. So, the point is where the classical one and then blends with the romantic one, it is a matter of creation. I do not think that even the creator was very much aware that when it got transformed into this. Especially all landscapes are the results of some components given to you or the user, and you are viewing it yourself. So, individual person will perceive this in different manner, but yet the structure or the grammar of all these landscape style that I have discussed, they remain same. They do not change. Your expression or your experience may be slightly varied, but it does not make any difference. Otherwise, if you as a researcher look at it, you will find that they are very organized and well structured. You just take out one of the elements from Japanese garden, the Japanese garden is no longer true to its original landscape styles. You take out, say an example, you have Charbagh, you break the Charbagh, the 4 quadrants of the Mughal garden, it will lose its Mughal garden identity. So, what is important I would like to point out is, whenever you are trying to recreate a landscape style, then be very true and honest to the elements, honest to the actual geometry, honest to the scale. It is your discretion that where you are going to use it, but you are the only judge as a designer to decide that what kind of landscape style will you use. If your building is highly inorganic in arrangement and suddenly you put one Mughal garden next to it, it does not fit well. It becomes jerky, it gives an emotional jerk. Your buildings are very much organic and you have put the Mughal garden next to it, it fits in. Your area is very much irregular and within that you have tried to put a Mughal garden, does not fit in. So, the idea is, why we are learning this? We are learning to emulate it, we are learning to see that how we can adopt this or we can make a little bit of modifications, but my sincere suggestion is, if you have understood the elements of it and the landscape character, then do not deviate from the elements and the landscape character, otherwise you will lose the actual structure of that particular landscape style. Okay, I stop here, but what lies ahead? Now we will be discussing in the next lectures some of the examples of European historic styles. So far we had been focusing more of central part of the world and also the oriental part of the world, and now there are many things to learn from the European landscape style. So, very quickly I will also cover that portion. Once you have understood about the landscape styles, then the landscape creation and how to create landscapes, all its technicalities and behavioral issues we will discuss in different course of time. Thank you. Enjoy the lecture.